Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Microsoft Security for ISV series. So we're excited to continue our third session for the series. And today's topic is Build Secure Multi-Tenant Solutions, Identity and Access Management for ISVs. So the series is tailored specifically for independent software vendors or ISVs, although in some ways the principles can be applied beyond ISVs. So we dive deep into the challenges and opportunities in securing your applications. In the previous episode, we cover design your product with security in mind, where we went through designing secure and resilient ISV applications. And you can check out the recording as well at aka.ms asiaisvsecurity/recording. So today we'll explore key strategies and how you can build and secure multi-tenant solutions. Thank you for joining us on the journey to help improve your security posture. And before we get started, let's cover the logistics quickly. So this event involves live captions in multiple languages. Here's how you can enable them. So go to language and speech, and you can select show live caption and choose your preferred language. We do recommend that you use Teams desktop client where you can get the best experience. So we'll also have a Q&A session at the end. So we try to make it as interactive as we can. And at the end, we can address any questions that you may have live, and also in the meantime, you can ask away your questions by using the Q&A button, where we can try to address it in the chat as well. All right, introducing the presenters. So I'm very grateful and privileged to be accompanied by two principal product managers in the Entra team. So we have Meryl Fernando, who's product manager in Microsoft in the Microsoft Entra customer exploration team. And his day job, he helps some of the Microsoft's largest enterprise customers on how they can deploy Microsoft Entra successfully. And of course, Kyle Marsh, principal product manager as well, working with developers to best optimize their Microsoft Identity platform. So he often works with a lot of ISVs and digital life companies. So looking forward to hearing from them. And myself, part of solution architect based in Melbourne, my work focuses on helping ISV partners build scalable SaaS solutions and secure solutions using cloud. All right, so let's move on to the topics for today. So agenda for today. So we covered the three essential topics. So number one is a bit of background of the series, and begin by setting the stage of overview of the Microsoft Security for ISV series. And we also cover the feature sessions where you can see, the series actually captured a lot of different wide variety of topics around security, and particularly targeted for ISVs. And the topic for today, multi-tenant considerations for identity. So we cover pertinent information on unique challenges often faced by ISVs that is designing multi-tenancy. So a lot of ISVs that I've talked to always have kind of similar challenges or common challenges that they face, is basically how they can serve a lot of customers. And that's kind of typical problem that ISVs often face. So we'll cover how identity can be designed and configured in such a way to address those challenges. Let's then cover a scenario on Carl and Merle to cover, when you add application to an app, what are the different permutations of Entra configurations that you can use so that you can best optimize for your scenarios. All right, so let's cover off the context again. We wanted to remind everyone that cyber threats have grown really tremendously for the past year or so. And you can see, based on the stats, particularly around threat actors that are tracked by Microsoft, and now 100 plus, a significant leap from 2023 and now 2025. The trend is definitely on the upside. So this definitely highlight that prioritizing security is no longer optional. So as ISVs, a lot of our solutions are being used by our customers. So it's important that we adapt and stay ahead of these challenges. And security for ISV series. So this is why we kind of introducing the series, to really recognize the importance of embedding security to all of our ISVs, and to help ISVs navigate these challenges. We basically bring in the series a comprehensive collection of webinars designed to provide ISVs with the tools and insights and strategies then to enhance their security posture in today's AI world. And we do have a total of 10 episodes. It occurs every month. And we want it to be a forum where we can learn and share together security around any topics related to security and specific challenges, lessons learned from ISVs. So looking forward to hearing from you on any of the, particular use cases or sector scenarios that you'd like us to cover. So looking forward to your feedback as well at the end, so you can provide feedback. And we have few links there. So as you see, aka.ms Asia ISV Security is basically the place where you can find the registration, where you can register and find out about future events. And we also record under recording tag there. So we upload the recording to our channel on YouTube, and also you can find the blog as well in there. So any key takeaways and strategies after every session, we'll try to put together that and put together in a blog post. All right, so we've come up with 10 episodes in the series. Again, this is subject to change, but we try to stick to it as much as we can. In terms of kind of ordering and so on, we'd like to see and adapt based on the feedback. But yeah, we aim to capture real-world challenges that ISVs are facing when building and securing applications. And additionally, also, ISVs work a lot with Marketplace, so we aim to also bring those security essentials for Marketplace as well, as you see in there. So you can find more info soon hopefully on our landing page, and soon that will be available, and a blog post as well. So keep an eye on that. Also, without these people on the screen, this won't be possible. So I'd like to thank everyone in the team, in the V team, that plays a pivotal role in launching the series. All right, so getting into the topic, before I hand it over to Carl and Meryl, I just wanted to highlight that in ISVs, as I said before, often face a unique challenge, and typically they build a solution that needs to work with to address multi-tenancy, which means that they build a platform. They need to be able to serve a different set of customers, and they need to be able to provide some sort of boundaries in those, so that there's no leakage of information between one tenant to another tenant. So identity plays a critical role in both two parts. It's basically around authentication and authorization. So authentication being, confirming that users are who they say they are, and authorization, validating users to have that permission to complete certain actions. So those are, key considerations and key questions as well around how do you manage authentication, authorization securely? Do you use off-the-shelf application, off-the-shelf servers, which we definitely do recommend, as you would be seeing or hearing from Carl and Meryl soon. And how do you also map to tenants and how you can switch between them? Some of those stuff are important that you need to embed into your design when you build the application. So a well-designed identity system that you want to work reliably and can scale and provide that great user experience is effectively, at the end of it, is the ultimate goal. So we look forward to hearing more from Carl and Meryl, who will explore these topics in more detail. Go ahead, Carl and Meryl.
Thanks a lot, Vic, for introducing us. We are super excited to talk about building multi-tenant apps and securing them for our ISV community. And I have Kyle here as well. So Kyle, we are going to be talking about these few different topics about, when you're building apps, should you use something like Microsoft External ID versus rolling your own? Should you use an identity library like MSAL versus, building your own thing? And then also looking at identity tenants and, whether you have a single tenant or multiple tenant, when, whether you have one for each customer. So we'll dive into some of those. But before that, I think it's good to always start with the basics, right? So we look at what identity is. Sorry. Okay, so Kyle, tell us, what does the Microsoft Identity Platform do for developers?
Sure. So the first thing is Microsoft Entra ID has a tremendous number of features that are interesting to the IT pros of the world and your admins of your tenant. But when it boils down, what do I get as a developer from the identity platform? Well, the first thing is it handles authenticating the users, whether it's password, passwordless, MFA, all of that work you don't have to do in the implementation. You don't have to worry if I'm storing your credentials correctly or anything like that. You simply delegate all of that off to your identity provider, in this case, Microsoft Entra ID. Now, the second thing is it authorizes your application to access resources. This is not the old days where an application could just run on a Windows desktop and do anything it wants. Nowadays, we want to make sure applications are only accessing the data, the information, the users that we want to allow them to do that. And that's what we call authorization. And we provide that as part of the identity platform. Now, this does the other thing that we need to provide, of course, is a robust set of APIs so that you can access the information in the directory, the user information, the group information, application information, possibly. There's a lot of different information that we store as part of the directory functionality in Entra ID. And we use the Microsoft Graph API to do that. Now, the nice thing about us using the Microsoft Graph API is once you learn the pattern of using that API, you can use it not only to access the directory, but email, SharePoint, all kinds of workloads across Microsoft M365 is all driven through that same pattern, and you only have to learn one set of patterns to access all of that capability. Now, specifically for ISVs, there's a couple of other things. First off, we support the idea of provisioning users into your app. And this allows your customer to simply assign, say, users and groups to your application, and then we'll call what's called the SCIM API in order to tell your application, here's a user, here's the role we want that user to have in your app, and so on. And then to make it easier for your application to be accepted by your customers, make sure they can trust your application and the operations you're asking to perform, we enable you to become what's called a verified app publisher. So the company who's running your software knows that you have a business relationship with Microsoft and you've been vetted through that process.
Right. So what you're telling me is if I use an identity service like Entra External ID, I don't need to build a login page. I don't need to, like, as an ISV dev, create a text box and, have the whole login flow and things like that.
Yeah, not only that, and you also don't have to do all the nitty gritty of, think of all the breaches out there. How many times have we heard about this service got breached and that service got breached and a million passwords were stolen? Why? Right. They weren't storing them correctly or some issue with the way they're stored. I, as a developer, might not even have access to that layer. That may not even be me. And yet it could be broken. And if I use a service like Entra ID or Entra ID external identities, I don't have to worry about that.
Okay, so as an ISV, I don't even need to think about storing the passwords.
Nope.
In a database. Exactly. All of that
exactly
managed as
all
a
of that's
service.
Gone.
Okay. Yep. Oh, neat. So
you're freed from that burden entirely.
Right. Sorry. And if like in Australia, we have the ACAC Essential 8, which says we need to do MFA even for ISV solutions, right? And I know in the region, other countries are looking to bring that as a standard. So if that needs to be done, what code do I need to write to enable MFA?
Well, that's the great thing about the platform. You don't have to do anything. Whether the application is configured to use username and password or MFA or passwordless, those are all decisions that the IT admins at each of your customers make. They decide what level of credentials they want. Your application is a very simple, straightforward. You ask for a token. You're either going to get the token and can continue, or you don't, in which case you need to stop.
Okay, so that's fine for my enterprise customers. You're saying the IT admins would, they would control. But if I'm building a consumer, ISV app, and I'm told by the team that I need to, deploy MFA, I need to enable MFA for the consumer users. How much code, like what code do I need to write then?
Yeah, so it's still the same thing. You're not going to change the code in your application, but in the case of a consumer-facing application, you as a developer are effectively both the developer of the application and the administrator of that service. You provide both ends, so you decide, yes, my users will need to do MFA, and it's a simple configuration on your Entra external identity side, but the code you write is the same regardless.
Okay. And so previously, like lots of ISVs, when we build apps, we just create our own database with roles and permissions and what people, what the API can do. And then when we write the API, we need to check against our database, depending on if the user is an admin or not and things like that. So you're saying if there's a built-in authorization model as well, right?
Yep. Absolutely, and you can define. I have an admin role in my application, or I have a submitter, an approver, those kinds of things. You can define these roles, and we can. And in an enterprise case, the enterprise can assign their own users and groups to those roles, and you are just told this is an admin, this is a submitter, an approver. In the case of consumers, that's usually a little less often, but you also can control that in the same way.
Oh, nice. So if I have an enterprise customer and I'm using Entra for all my roles and permissions, I just don't need to do anything. The admin on the other end can, at the customer side, can decide. Maybe they have security groups and they can just assign a security group to a role, and it'll just work.
Exactly. You don't have to worry about how do I create this role? Where am I going to store it? How am I going to handle it? Who's going to be a member of this role? Do I support users? Do I also support groups? How do I manage those groups? Do I get the groups from here or from there? All of that is taken care of because you can simply say, I'm configuring this role. Let your customers assign a group. And in that token we talked about a minute ago, it'll simply have the roles and say admin or whatever role that you've defined.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, that just takes off so much code that I need to build and debug and write. That's amazing.
Yep.
Nice. And so if I need to build an app that works with, against Microsoft Graph and call into Microsoft APIs, say I'm building a Teams add-in or something else that works with my customers' data, you also said, right, that I need to get it verified. Like, what's the process? Is it something that takes months? Is it like the App Store review that, Apple and Google have?
Yeah, so, one of the things we want to do is make it easier for ISVs to get their software in the hands, their services in the hands of those customers. Now, one of the things we talked about earlier is we need to be authorized. So your application is going to ask permission. Hey, I would like to sign in a user. I'd like to see that user's profile information, these kinds of other kinds of operations. Now, your app, you're an ISV, your app is asking for this permission. To help make it simpler for the IT folks to say, yes, I can trust this entity, you can become a verified publisher. A verified publisher is really just joining the, I'm sorry, I don't know the new name, the Microsoft Partner Network. It just got recently updated in the name. Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
It did change, unfortunately. I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Well,
anyways, the Microsoft Partner Network, as you join that, there's a vetting process. We make sure you are who you say you are and so on.
Right.
So there is a check. We make sure that you are an actual ISV and you really do sell the software and you are who you claim to be. And then we'll give you an ID that you'll simply put into your app registration. And that will say, okay, this is being published by a verified publisher. And when the customer sees the request I would like to sign in users. I'd like to read the user's profile. They'll get a little blue check mark that says, yes, this publisher is verified. They have that Microsoft Partner Network membership. They have a business relationship with Microsoft.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So it's not an app review process where I need to give Microsoft my app and have the app reviewed. This is just saying I am who I am.
That's right, because at the fundamental core here, the customer has to trust you as a developer to want to run your app. And this is Microsoft saying, we know who developed this application. It's not some bad actor group. It's not someone trying to hack your system. We know who developed this application, and we verify they are who they say they are.
Right. Got it. Perfect. Okay, so tell us more about the identity platform itself.
Yeah, so it's made up of a number of different components. At the top layer, we have a number of things that you as a developer might interact with. For example, that partner network membership we talked about so you could become a verified publisher. But as with anything, we want to provide ease of use and make it easy for you to integrate. So we have libraries, for example, on a number of different platforms, .NET, Python, C++, these kinds of different platforms that we have.
Right.
We have the core of how this is a web service. This is a cloud authentication provider. So we have endpoints. Those endpoints meet the standards of that they implemented. So we are OpenID Connect certified.
Right.
We implement SAML, etc. So these are the tools that we make available to you to make it easier for you to integrate. We also support a number of different types of identities with those endpoints and libraries. So we have our consumer accounts in Microsoft personal accounts or Microsoft accounts. We have our standard customer enterprise accounts with our Entra ID accounts. And then we have external identities where you are either inviting a lot of partners into your enterprise or directly accessing your customers who may not have an association they're connected to. So we have different ways that you can have tools that talk to those customers. Now, at the very foundation of it all is we are built on standards. We're built on OpenID Connect. We're built on SAML and SCIM, as I talked about before, for provisioning, OAuth and OAuth 2. These are core to how we have implemented our system. So that means that it's often possible to interact with all kinds of other systems who implement these same standards.
Right. Okay. And that means I guess that's how the integration with Google and maybe Facebook sign in and the others work. So my app doesn't need to be just only a Microsoft account app. It can work with the all these other identities. Like the user can bring their own. They don't want to creating new accounts, right? They might want to just use their Google account.
Yeah, you can. So especially this is very popular, of course, in a customer reach scenario where I have my customers and the customers, people say, well, I'd like to use my Gmail or Facebook because they don't want to create a bunch of new accounts and credentials. So if that's a choice, now you as the developer have to say, yes, I'll allow Google or I'll allow Facebook or not.
Got it. Yeah.
And then once you've done that configuration, then yes, your customer can say, oh, yeah, I've already got a Gmail account. I'll use that. I've already got a Facebook or an Outlook or what have you. I'll use that. And they don't have to create a new identity just to use your app or service.
Okay. All right. So tell me more about, you mentioned the authentication library and you said, you support different languages and so on. Like there are so many other libraries available already, or I might just, roll my own when, say, if I'm writing with React and so on. If I'm building apps where my customers are mostly like Microsoft customers and I want to integrate better, what are the advantages? Like, why should I use this Microsoft authentication library instead of like rolling my own code?
I'm actually good with, obviously, the Microsoft authentication libraries are very optimized and take advantage of a number of features, some of which go a little bit past the standards in our library. So, for example, one of the things that we support is something called continuous access evaluation. It allows us to not just live on the lifespan of the token, say, hey, I've given this application a token, they can access the resource for an hour, but we can, given our system, say, oh no, look, that user has lost their device and their IT admin has said revoke their sessions, and we'll stop that access in minutes and not wait for that hour. So we can do a little bit more than just the standards when you use our Microsoft authentication libraries. But if you're in an interesting environment that hasn't got a Microsoft authentication library, I would go ahead and use a well-maintained a library that's available. I, for example, once did a project where we were using an IBM platform, and it was easier just to turn on the platform's OpenID Connect support than anything else, because every other part of their tool was fully integrated with doing the authentication that way.
Oh,
That's
nice.
great.
Okay.
What I don't like to see developers do is that roll your own process here.
Right.
Yes, on the surface it looks pretty easy. They don't look like complicated protocols, but there are a host of different attacks under the covers. The OpenID Connect best practices document is over 70 pages. So the doc might be only 20 pages and you think that's not so bad.
Yes.
You have to read and know and interpret and implement everything in that best practices session, because if you don't, you really run a high probability of being attacked and actually being successfully attacked. The bad guys might get there. So really, it's okay to use any well-maintained standards-based library. That's great. Make sure it's well-maintained and not been left to wither on the vine, because these things get updates all the time. They're always being adjusted. Once a vulnerability is discovered, there's a mitigation, and that mitigation has to be implemented. So I really don't like to see developers implement their own protocol, or if you do, just be aware that you've taken on a lifelong chore, and you will need to keep up to date with those standards. That best practices doc is updated all the time. Now, you know, some developers, some large ISVs say, oh, sure, no, we do that. I get that. And you're willing to make the investment, but it is an investment and it doesn't go away ever.
Right. And yeah, we hear this in the news all the time, right? Some breach or the other, and it's usually through the front door that the attackers get in. And we're already using so many different libraries as we build modern applications. So it'll be easier to just reuse one of the existing ones. And if you want to really make use of some of the Microsoft specific ones, then you can use the Microsoft Authentication Library. But if I'm not using the Microsoft Authentication Library, I'm not really like losing out, as long as it's a well-maintained one and
that's right.
The community is working on it.
There's some optimizations that won't be available, but the core, the level of standard that the level of security the standard provides is absolutely there, and you're not losing anything in that respect. And like I said, I find the development environments that we don't have an MSOL library for. They're very unique, or maybe sometimes very old. This can really, you'll find often there is a SAML or an OAuth2, preferably OpenID Connect library or functionality available, and you can build on that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I've seen things like Next.js or Next.auth, and and there are so many, right? Like if you're using on the Nuxt framework, and Go would have their own thing. Cool.
Yeah,
awesome.
And we are standards at the core.
Right. Okay. So I'm convinced I want to use the Microsoft Entra platform for an app that I'm going to build. What's the process? Where do I start? And what should I do? Just give me like a high level overview.
Well, let's look at a few steps here. The first thing is you have to decide that you're going to trust the Microsoft Identity Platform. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll note that's the first thing. You're trusting it, and since you're here, let's assume that you're going to make that choice, and I thank you for your trust. So let's go ahead and do the next thing. I'll get a little check mark next to you've agreed to trust the identity platform. Now, the extra thing is, now how will customers make sure that they're trusting my app, right? So how will you make sure a customer says, yes, I trust your app, you can access my resources that are being protected with Entra ID? You need to determine whether your application is working on behalf of itself, it's some kind of a background process or an agent of some description, or
Right.
whether you're working on behalf of a user who signed in or is signed in.
Right.
You need to know what resources you're going to access and when you need to access them. And you need to know when to ask for permission in order to access those resources.
Okay.
Now, this sounds like a lot of steps, but it's really a question
Yeah.
of just making some initial decisions that we need to do, and then we're basically going to request a token from Entra ID, and that
Right.
token is going to be configured and working on the choices that we've made here. So let's go on to the next decision or our next step here. How do we get a customer or an application to trust, to say it's trusting the identity platform? So that first step, let's go to the next slide,
Yep.
is creating an application registration.
Right. And this is something I do in the Entra portal.
That's right. You can do it in the Entra portal. You can also do it with Microsoft Graph if you were trying to make it easy for your customer. You might provide them with a script or a little app that would do the app registration for them if that was the case. But the very core here is that Entra ID needs to know who you are. You're as an application. We're establishing effectively the application's identity here.
Right.
And by doing this registration, you're telling Entra ID, I'm an app, I exist, and I'm going to trust the identity platform for my authorization authentication needs. I like to think of this as, what does a developer know about the app? You need to know, what kind of app you're building. You know if it's a public client, what we call, is it running on desktops and mobiles, or is it running in the back end in a data center or cloud somewhere? The name, the logo, how you want to be visualized. These are all things that an application developer would need or might need to know. When we do an application registration, we're going to give you what's called a client ID. That identifies your application to Entra ID. You need to know that because every time you talk to Entra ID, you're going to use that client ID. So it's either something the developer already knows or something they need to know that they're going to get from this registration.
Right. So I guess this applies whether you're a big ISV, like, say I know Salesforce and ServiceNow integrate with Entra. Do they also create the same thing, the same way?
Absolutely.
Even if you're a small ISP, like a one solo app builder building an app?
Yep, it all starts with an app registration, you bet.
Awesome. So it's the same for everyone.
Same for everybody, you bet.
Perfect.
Now, I will point out, as developers, you have to be understanding that an admin gets to control who gets to register apps in their tenant. So for folks who are trying to, maybe you're a line of business app developer, or you're saying, oh, I've got a tenant, my company has a tenant, I'd like to register an app, you may be blocked. It's not unusual for IT departments, security departments to say, no, I want to know every app that gets registered here. There'll be another process in your organization that you'll need to get familiar with to say, great, I need to get this registration done for me, and they'll provide the information to them.
Okay. So yeah, it depends on each admin of the company.
Yeah, and now there's a second question. The first question is really, really easy to answer. What's the name? And it's so easy to answer because you can also just change it anytime. So it's no big deal. Just what's your descriptive name? The second question I always stumble over, what does this even mean? Supported account types. And on the face of it, it's not easy to really figure out what's meant by this. But it is actually key because it's one of those decisions that you need to make. How am I going to work? How are my customers going to access my app? What's the population of users I want to be able to use this app? All of those answers are effectively wrapped up in this question.
Okay. And I can't change this once I pick something?
Yeah. Once you've made this, there is some level of changing we can do, but there are issues if you do these changes, so you have to go through some hoops and make sure everything gets done correctly.
And if I'm testing, I can just try one of these and build the app, and it's just a matter of just going and creating a new app.
That's
and putting that in my code, right? Like if I do make a mistake. So it's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world. This impacts your code in that when you create a new app registration, you get a new client ID. So you change one string for another.
Right. So if I go into production and I have like users, then it's a bit harder to change.
That's right. Because the nature of your users will have, for example, granted consent for your application to be allowed to do things, and a new application wouldn't have that consent, so it would have to re-grant it.
Got it.
Right.
Okay, so how can you walk me through what those different options mean?
You bet. The first one is accounts in this organizational directory only, and what that means is only users who are in the tenant where this app is registered are allowed to use this app. So it's the perfect choice for a line of business app developer. I'm developing an application for my company, and the only people who are allowed to use it have to be connected to this company. Now, they might be native users, an employee of the company. They might be partners who come from an organization where there's a lot of cross-collaboration, and therefore they're guests in the tenant, and we'll talk about that. But to begin with, they have to be connected to this tenant, and we call this a single tenant app. Only the users where the app is registered can use this app.
Right. Okay. So if I create an app, make it single tenant, then that it's mainly limited to users that are already in my directory.
That's tenant. Right. It's absolutely limited to just those users. Right. Another user from another tenant can't get there. So as you go here, and I made the app registration here in the adatum tenant. If a user from another tenant, which I think is the next click. Nope. Okay, that's fine. The users from that they only come from that tenant.
Right. Okay.
Now, registering an app is not enough. It's not just the application developers who get a say in how an application works inside of a company. There are IT admins who have their say. They can decide, well, which users are even allowed to use this app and what roles would they be given inside that app. Do they want to apply something called a conditional access policy? So maybe your app needs a higher level of MFA applied to it. Now, you don't do any coding for this, but the IT admin might say, well, you know what? This is a sensitive bit of information. I want a phishing-resistant MFA to be able to use this. Or they can decide a particular authentication strength, or maybe limit from the locations it's used, etc. So there's a lot of ability for an IT admin to decide how an app runs in that tenant. And for that, we need a new object, something called an enterprise application, or under the covers, it's referred to as a service principal.
Right. Okay.
So with our single tenant app, we have our app registration, and within that app registration, we automatically create the enterprise app, the service principal, and that will make it so that the user John from adatum will be able to access this application, but Jane here from Contoso will not. So we automatically create that enterprise app for you. You don't have, that's not an operation. We automatically create them. Right. But in this case, that single tenant will only enable that single tenant access. Now, if we look at how this works for multi-tenant, this is the second option of supported account types. Accounts in any organizational directory. What this means is you're happy with any user signing into your app. It doesn't matter what tenant they're connected to. You can even optionally add in consumer accounts here if you wanted Microsoft personal accounts to be included. But here, adatum registers the tenant, the app, just like we had talked about. And in the adatum tenant, there's a service principal that gets created. Now, let's say Jane from Contoso does want to sign in. Now, you can use something called the common endpoint or the organizational endpoint, and that allows you to say, I don't know what tenant Jane comes from, just sign her in, or sign the individual in. So Jane signs in, and Entra ID under the covers will automatically create a service principal or enterprise app in Jane's Contoso tenant. So now there are two service principals for this application, one in the adatum tenant, one in the Contoso tenant. And the IT pros manipulate or manage those service principals. So they grant consent not to your app registration, but to the enterprise app, the service principal. So in Contoso, they might say, yes, I'm going to allow these 5 permissions. But it's possible adatum, if you've written the application to allow this, may say I'm only going to do 4 because I didn't buy that optional module.
Right.
So this is a multi-tenant app. Now, by default, we expect that you as a developer will keep this data separate, right? We have a separate enterprise app. And for example, that would only give you access if Jane signs in, you can only access their Microsoft Graph data in Contoso. If John signs in, you can only access adatum data. And we would expect you as a multi-tenant developer to keep that separation. Now, obviously, if your purpose of your solution is to enable collaboration across these organizations, you're going to have some level of sharing. But that's really up to your solution. But we caution you to make sure that you do keep the data from the various tenants separate to within what your design guidelines are.
So you have single tenant, which is mostly the company, like if you're building a line of business, say I'm working in a corporate, I'm working for Contoso, I'm building apps for users who are in Contoso, and I'm employed by Contoso, I would do that. But if I'm an ISV who builds apps that will be used by multiple people, right? Like I'm like a ServiceNow or Salesforce or some other ISV, and I'm building an app, I would most probably pick the multi-tenant option.
That's right.
Because I want my app to be used by everyone, right? And they don't need to configure. So if they do that, they don't need to configure all these reply URLs and SAMLs and all of that stuff on their end. All they need to do is the admin just signs in and they consent through the UI, and that's it. That's all they need to do.
They don't have to create or manage an app registration. They just have to agree by this process of consent that, yes, the operations this application is asking to do, read a user's profile, maybe send mail on their behalf, maybe read a SharePoint site, something like that. The IT admin says, yes, that's okay. We're okay with the provider, the ISV who provided this, and off they go. They don't have or manage an app registration. They just control their enterprise app where they can decide who gets to use it and so on.
Okay, so that's neat because I, as an ISV, when I used to be building apps before, I would need to send the details to them, or we have a web page where we tell them what to put in the reply URLs, but then they might miss something and it's not configured and we need to spend time troubleshooting. And you're saying with this approach, a lot of those things are gone, right? That's right. Sort of problems don't exist.
Yep.
Nice. Okay.
So it's a much easier process.
Nice. And so what's this whole thing called guests or B2B? And like when I'm building, sometimes these enterprises ask these questions. Can you explain what?
That's right. The external identities, especially in the case of the enterprise model, so not when we're reaching out to customers directly, where the only thing we have are customers, but this is a model where we have these two companies, adatum and Contoso, and they want to collaborate. Maybe I want some Contoso users looking at my SharePoint sites or participating in Teams or what have you. So to do that, I could still have my line of business application. I could have a single tenant application registration. But in order for someone from Contoso to participate, I need to invite that user from Contoso to my tenant. And what we end up creating there is a guest object. So if I invite Jane to my tenant, right, what will happen is she'll be sent an invitation. Assuming that she accepts the invitation, we will create an object for Jane in the adatum tenant. So that invitation process brings in what we refer to as a guest object. Now, all of the rights and privileges that Jane has in the adatum tenant is really because we're managing that guest user object. So Now, the interesting separation here is that when Jane goes to access, let's say Jane's accessing a SharePoint file in the ADATM tenant, and she goes to sign in, well, the first thing, of course, is she'll be asked, to sign in, and at that point, we'll say, well, we don't know who Jane is, but go ahead and type. We'll send her. She'll type in her credential or her name. We'll go and ask the Contoso tenant to do the actual authentication. Hey, do you need to sign the user? Is there MFA? Whatever happens over there, right?
Okay.
We'll make sure the Contoso is certain it's Jane, and they'll come back and tell the ADATM Entra ID, yep, it's Jane, and then Jane will access because she's got her rights because she's Jane at Contoso, but managed through that guest object that's sitting in the ADATM tenant.
Okay, so if I'm an ISV and I'm building an app and it's being used by one of my customers, right? And they might have people coming in maybe for like maybe let's say I'm building some collaboration application where people can, generate PowerPoint documents and do stuff. So that's my app that I'm building. Now, John, who is working for ADATM, he can access it. That's fine. But what you're saying is I don't need to do anything if they invite maybe their lawyers from, coming in from somewhere else, and they have other suppliers and vendors, and they are coming in through this B2B flow. You're saying I don't need to do anything and my app will just work even for those other users. And
yeah, so there is one caveat here I will point out.
Right.
If you use the common or organization's endpoint, meaning I'll sign in anyone from anywhere, right, it's a little difficult for the users to discover how they say, I actually want to sign. So if Jane gets that message and signs in on the common endpoint, most of the time she'll sign in to Contoso and can't access your app.
Right.
There is a way in the UI for her to say she wants to be from ADATM, but it's not easily discoverable, frankly.
Right.
The easy way for you to make sure that Jane is allowed in ADATM, if you use the specific endpoint for ADATM, which you can use even if you've registered as a multi-tenant app, you can say, right now I'm running for the ADATM, that's my customer, sign everyone in who's associated with ADATM. You'll pick up John, he's a native user. You'll pick up Jane, she's a guest. No problem. Right. That's the only condition you'd have to think about in your app.
Okay, got it. So, for example, if I'm an ISP and I have a custom domain for each of my customers,
perfect.
Then it's
you bet.
just fine, right? Because Jane will go to adatum.myapp.com and then you'll know exactly where. But if I'm using like a single URL for all my customers, that's when I might need to do something to.
That's right. Jane will have
them to switch.
Jane will most likely sign into Contoso instead of ADATM.
Right. Got it. Okay. But it means I don't need to build this whole invite flow and everything that Microsoft already has. And maybe those users are already in that tenant and they can do all that stuff. So I just get all those benefits without really needing to invest or build or maintain this infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty exciting to do. So before I move into that, I know there have been some issues, and this is a thing that ISVs do a lot, and I think we'll cover it towards the end. But if I use their email as a unique ID in my system, that's going to trip me up, right? Because I'll be having Contoso Jane at contoso.com, but she's trying to access ADATM, and if I use her email as a unique one, I can't tell the difference between Jane as a guest and Jane. If Contoso also buys my software, that's going to cause problems.
It's just one of the problems you'll have if you use email as a primary identifier. People change their emails. Emails get reused as they cycle through different people at companies. I've even talked to one company who said, "Oh no, we reuse our emails like the next week. If somebody leaves, they're right back to somebody else."
Oh,
so if I've used that email as an identifier, I'm talking to the wrong person.
Right.
We would strongly encourage everyone to use one of the immutable claims that are available in the token or that will tell you back in the response. There's something called an object ID, which is the user ID of the user in all of our systems, whether it was external identities or Entra ID. We encourage you to use that as a primary identifier. We have another claim called the subject claim, which works exactly the same way, except that it promotes privacy. If I associate data with someone using the subject claim as a key, if my data is ever breached, the attacker can't go from that data back to the individual. So if you're really got sensitive data and you want to make sure you're doing everything to assure privacy, use the subject claim as your key, as opposed to the object ID claim. Object ID claim works great, of course, but I can go from object ID back to the individual identity, right? So there is that possibility. But both of those are really great things to use as the real identifier of the user. Things like email and UPN are going to set you up with a host of problems.
Right. Okay, so what are the other tips like that? What should I do to make sure my app, I build it securely and don't run into issues?
Well, the prime thing you're going to get is an application. You're going to sign a user in. We're going to give you something called an ID token. Don't just say, I got an ID token, it must be okay, right? Because you don't want somebody who's found a way to steal a token from somebody else to access your application as if they were that user. So always make sure you're validating the audience claim, making sure this is for your app and not some other app. If you have a set list of particular tenants that you work with or customers you have, then sure, validate that it's not from somebody who hasn't yet bought your product or hasn't done anything yet. If you find a token with the wrong tenant, send them to your customer acquisition page. Hey, you should sign up. This is a great opportunity. You'd like it. If you'd like, sign up and buy this.
Nice.
Make sure that the user is the right user, and especially when you start doing operations on their behalf, make sure that that individual, through the subject claim and through the actor that's there, that you're not giving them, now know exactly who the user is. Make sure you're not giving them something they weren't supposed to get.
Cool. Okay. And does Microsoft provide more guidance online that I can follow?
Certainly. There's you'll see a couple of the links here. It is something that we do provide lots of guidance for on how to do that. There's one caveat here. Yes, if you're doing an access token, you're implementing API protection. Those tokens need to be validated. The signature needs to be validated. It's another place I don't want to see you doing that by yourself. I want you to use a well-maintained library that properly knows it, because there are lots and lots of attacks on token validation.
Right.
Token signatures.
With attackers trying to give me like fake tokens or
let's take something simple. Maybe you think you implement the standard, but you actually let a hole through, which is allowed in the standard. Signature type, none, which means it's not assigned at all, so they could put anything they want in the token, and that would be bad, right? Because I could just type up a token and send it to you. Well, that's no good, right? So you need to make sure that all of these things are properly implemented. It really is important to stick to the standards. I'm saying that, but find somebody who's done the full implementation, because none of this is simple at the standards level.
Got it. Awesome. Well, Kyle, thanks so much. I think I've learned quite a lot, and I'm sure the audience who listened have learned quite a lot about building apps for the Microsoft platform that integrates well with Microsoft customer platforms, and also how, what to do when you're building a multi-tenant application as well. It's been really insightful to know all the capabilities that are available by using this platform.
Well, great. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Awesome. Over to you, Vic.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Meryl, Kyle. I wanted to sort of leave these resources as well in the screen. On the screen now, as you can see, there's a short links and a bunch of short links that you probably find them very, very useful. And at the same time, we also looking for your feedback. So there's a QR code in there. There's also a link which I'll share in the chat, where you can provide feedback for the upcoming sessions and this session as well. So yeah, I look forward to that.
One quick thing before we go, that very first link, Kyle, like what you spoke today, we shared, is just part of a bigger workshop, right? Like it's a 2-day odd workshop.
It's it's 6 hours total of content that covers some of what we covered today, but also much more detail across not only signing in users in your application, but implement APIs and their entire permission and consent model and so on. So it's a very complete look at our platform. So if you're interested in more details here, that is a good workshop to go see.
Oh, nice. And that's all published on YouTube, right?
Yes, the videos on YouTube and all the content is up on GitHub.
Nice, perfect.
Amazing. Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Meryl and Carl. And yeah, we're going to move on to Q&A very soon.